This is a Megalodaunt, also known as a Sharko. This is an Alpha Megalodaunt. This is a Crimson Megalodaunt. This is a Megalodaunt. This is a Prime Megalodaunt. This is an exotic Megalodaunt. Do you see the problem here? We've just come out of Deepwoken's largest update drought in quite a while. Before this update's recent release, we'd been left in the dark on what was actually happening for quite a while there. Thankfully, we've narrowly avoided another week of delays, but the past week has essentially snapped a lengthy tradition of, at the very least, receiving communication from the devs regarding update news. Regardless, this lack of transparency is an issue that should be spoken on, just not by me. Thus, today, I'm going to discuss a much less serious issue, Deepwoken's reskin problem. What is this problem exactly? Well, it's a monster issue. I mean that in both ways, but what I'll be talking about today is the recent lack of creativity concerning the monsters being added to Deepwoken. I have but two humble requests. The first is to subscribe. Yes, it's the compulsory YouTuber drivel, but if you want Deepwoken lore content, there's no better place to look. My second request is for you to pause at this video's end and to think about this issue for yourself. Developers are people too, regardless of how you feel about their work. Also, I'm not actually pressed about reskins in a Roblox game, and you shouldn't be either. It's not that serious. This is just something interesting I've been longing to make a video on. Thank you, and let's begin. While 3 or even 4 Sharko variants is somewhat acceptable, a whopping 6 reskins of the same monster just isn't satisfying. I'm not going to beat around the bush here. I'm not a fan of this methodology when it comes to creating new monsters to add to the game. I don't even think you can call these new either, particularly not the 2 variants that I take particular offense to, the Prime and Exotic Megalodonts. At the very least, the aforementioned Alpha, Crimson, and Mecha variants of the Sharko have some place in the game's lore and or a reason to exist. The Alpha Megalodaunt is just that, the alpha of a specific pack of Megalodonts. We learn that Sharkos travel in packs via the book Archivist Journal Megalodaunt, which can be found in-game. The Crimson Megalodon alludes to the events of the third layer, and ties in with the First Light, a rarely obtained greatsword, so at the very least, this variant has some ties to existing canon. The Megalodaunt, in my opinion, is the most well thought out variant of the 3. The Megalodonts were artificially constructed by the Ignition Union as either a weapon or a defense mechanism, but Summer Company infiltrators arrived before their completion and managed to drive these Megalodonts berserk. In my opinion, this is the golden standard as to how a variant of a monster should be constructed. Now, compare the Megalodaunt to its prime and exotic counterpart. The Prime Megalodaunt and the Exotic Megalodaunt are quite literally just reskins of the original. The Prime Megalodaunt has Vanta black skin, and the Exotic Megalodaunt is marked by a deep green pigment. The Prime Megalodaunt has, at the very least, one distinguishing feature to speak of. It can fire a beam at you. In fact, this beam is ripped directly from the lionfish, just colored black. Yes, this is how low the bar is. Now, you may be wondering why I've granted the Alpha and Crimson variants a pass here, considering they're also just reskins with an extra move. However, like I clarified earlier, these two have an established place in Deepwoken canon, and even outside of lore references, their inclusion simply just makes sense. Why? Well, consider the time period when they were added to the game. An Alpha Sharko makes complete sense as an addition, regardless of how much you know your lore, and the Crimson Sharko was, at that time, only the second variant of the Megalodon, and to my knowledge, it had remained that way for a long while. Meanwhile, the Prime and Exotic Megalodonts have been added after a whopping 4 other Megalodon variants. In fact, the Exotic variant is somehow even worse than the Prime variant, because the Exotic one doesn't even have an extra move. This makes it by far the laziest variant of the Megalodon to date. Dare I say it's one of the laziest additions to the game of all time. You may be wondering why these variants, the Prime and Exotic Megalodons respectively, were even added in the first place. The Prime Megalodon, to my knowledge, was first seen within the VAT, which is the trial of the Gaunt Man. The Gaunt Man's trial is an entirely different can of worms that I'll get into later, but for now, the Prime variant was added to the game so it could feature as an enemy in a boss rush gauntlet. The Exotic Megalodon, on the other hand, was... Okay, I genuinely don't know why this thing even exists. In fact, it only has one unique drop, the Exotic Hide. The Exotic Hide has to be the saving grace of the Sharko, right? I mean, look, if it's a unique drop, you've got to be able to craft something crazy. You trade it for the Curse of Captain Green. An entire variant of Sharko exists, so you can trade for Captain Green's enchant stone. In fact, this trade was only implemented this update, so 2 days ago, after months of the hide being in-game and it being completely useless, and you couldn't drop it or sell it. I'm sure you can see why I have problems with that. With meaningless variants like these two being added to the game, even when we ignore their lack of integration into the game's environment and story, these reskins aren't even fun to fight, simply because they're just the same old Megalodons that we've all fought day in, day out. If they're not fun to fight, they have no relevance to the game's lore, and they don't reward you with anything besides an enchant stone you may never use, what's the point? This is the part of the video where I finally move on from repeating Megalodon and Shaco 3 times a paragraph. Why? Well, this reskin issue extends far beyond just the Megalodons. We also have 5 different knights: the Sand Knight, Blizzard Knight, Astral Knight, the Moon Knight that you can fight at the Moon's Eyrie, and now the Moss Knight from Vow of Iron. Think that's all? Allow me to introduce you to the Crimson Pteropod, the Glacial Lionfish, Fury Nautilosaur, Prime Golem, Nightmare Thresher, and more. Now look, there's nothing wrong with these variants on their own. Having a second variation of a monster isn't hurting anyone, but 5 different types of Sand Knights. One thing I want to make clear is that I've never taken any offense to any of these variants until recently. The pointless addition of the Prime and Exotic Megalodons simply thrust this issue into the limelight for me. I haven't forgotten about the Parliament either. What a waste of an incredible name. It's literally just a deep bow with 2 extra heads stuck on, like paper mache. Seriously? In fact, I've been saving the worst for last. Look at this. A Nautilosaur Officiate. This monster is actually in Vow of Iron, by the way. A Squibbo wearing Enforcer armor. Why? This concept is so absurd that I'm still half convinced it's an April Fool's prank. Yes, this creature theoretically could exist, but just because you can create something doesn't mean it's the right move to make. This monster feels both rushed and cheap, not something you want in your new game mode that's immediately suffered from a stark lack of replayable content. Look, I've come to terms with the fact that these reskins will likely be a staple of Deepwoken content going forwards. At the end of the day, this video is a compilation of nitpicks I have. There are far more serious issues to be up in arms about. I'd also like to clarify that I do understand why these reskins exist. It's no doubt very difficult to brainstorm, model, and engineer new creatures that would fit in the world of Deepwoken, and the game's roster is already full of countless different creatures that all coexist seamlessly together. Full props to the developers for doing amazingly thus far, but monster variants simply lose their taste when they're joining an already full house or serve literally no purpose, in the case of the Exotic Megalodon or the Nautilosaur Officiate. Once again, this isn't a major issue. Don't harass people or get overly pressed about it, but if the developers really are leaning into diegetic world-building updates, they'll have to tackle these variants first. I was previously able to justify the Parliament and Prime Megalodon in the game's canon, but there's no way in hell I'll be able to theorize a way to squeeze in the exotic Shaco into the game's lore. In any fashion, I'm still excited for what future updates will bring, and I'm very excited to see the eventual dawn of new enemies in the ever-tantalizing 3rd layer in 4 years. Thank you for watching. I've been your lore master. See you tomorrow, or the day after, or the day after, or in 3 months. Take care of yourselves. There's always somebody out there who loves you. Bye.